Welcome back guys, today I will give you a tutorial about how you can create your own build with your own preferred engravings, weapons and more. There are a lot of decisions to make when you create your own build and I will guide you through the whole process from start to finish so you will avoid all the errors and traps you are most likely going to fall into. The first decision is whether you want to go with legendary gear or epic gear. Epic gear has several advantages over legendary gear because legendary armor has only 3 engraving and a set bonus, whereas epic armor has always 4 engravings. So in total there are 15 engravings for a legendary set and a set bonus and 20 engravings for an epic set but no set bonus. And these 5 additional engravings are much more powerful than any set bonus on any legendary armor. On top of that, legendary items have also a lot of useless engravings like adrenaline or damage to certain enemy groups. These are mostly rubbish and we don't want to use them in a perfect build. When we use epic gear, we can completely decide which items we want to buy from the blacksmith that has only the engravings we really want to have. The next big decision is if you want to go assassin, warrior or hunter playstyle. That basically determines the engraving every item should have as primary engraving. There's one exception because when you use the Bighorn Bow will use the warrior damage as your hunter damage. So if you own the Bighorn Bow, you will not need to use any hunter damage in your gear. You could then simply use the Bighorn Bow and use your warrior damage as your hunter damage in that kind of build. In this build we will also use the Bighorn Bow. So the decision narrows down to either assassin or warrior, and most people probably going for assassin because they think they can use the assassin damage conversion and get a ton of warrior damage out of it, but that is not how the damage conversion works. The damage conversion when you use it in any of your builds is equal for all 3 types. So when you have 300% assassin, warrior or hunter damage, you will get 150% for the other 2. So you will not get that crazy number of assassin damage from the inventory page converted into your warrior damage. Instead you will only ever convert the percentages and not the numbers itself. But any damage that is already all damage from the Farks, from the yumminess or from the 10% all damage engravings will be ignored in the conversion. The next decision will be about your weapon type. Of course there are different weapons, daggers, swords, axes, blunts, staffs and spears. Every item have different advantages and disadvantages. It really doesn't matter, you can just pick what you want. But no matter which weapon you choose, it should always have your primary damage engraving. Ideally for a warrior build like our build, that should be warrior damage, then damage with your weapon type like damage with daggers, damage with swords, etc. and critical damage. These will be the perfect engravings for a perfect warrior, dagger, sword, blunt, axe, staff or spear. The weapon you choose also determines where you have to place your weapon damage engravings. These can usually be placed on every melee weapon, so it is most important that you use the same melee weapon in both slots. So when we simply pick our axes here and make a heavy axe build, we have damage with heavy blades on our first weapon, we pick another heavy blade, so we have damage with heavy blades also on our second weapon, and then we also have to pick a torso where we have damage with heavy blades and damage with heavy weapons. Weapon damage can always be on both melee weapons, and for the heavy weapons it will be on the torso, for swords and daggers it will be on the head, and for staffs and spears it will be on the boots. So having the same melee weapon in both slots gives you 30% more weapon damage. That is a huge factor because weapon damage is increasing your warrior damage the most. It is even more important than critical damage, so always go for weapon damage first. So even without the other 4 pieces we already have 93,000 warrior damage, and thanks to the Bighorn Bow we will also get 93,000 as our hunter damage. For the legendary engravings for our melee weapons we have basically 3 perfect options. The first one should always be armor penetration. Armor penetration has no penalty and it can be as strong as 100% damage increase from the Farks. Of course, a 100% damage increase from the Farks of Olympus is the next best option, but it also has a downside that it caps your health to be 25%. Which doesn't really matter because you will still have 2 hits before you die. So on Nightmare it won't even make a difference, you will always take 2 hits before you die even at full health. And then of course the third option is a damage conversion. In 3 variations you can convert your hunter damage, you can convert your warrior damage or your assassin damage. Since warrior damage will be the highest value in this build, we will choose convert warrior damage to all damage. That doesn't even change our warrior damage, but it creates a lot of additional assassin and hunter damage for us. For the other other heavy blade we will use armor penetration so that we can play at full health, not having any handicap. For the bow we will use the Bighorn Bow, and you will most likely have to engrave 10% crit chance on the Bighorn Bow to get to 100%. If you don't have the Bighorn Bow, you can of course also use an epic bow. That bow should have warrior damage when you go for warrior damage primary. Then you can pick one of the two elemental damage types, use 10% crit chance and have another legendary engraving of your choice. So without the Bighorn Bow you will have one more legendary engraving, but we will stick here with the Bighorn Bow because that is much better. On the remaining gear pieces that do not have weapon damage, you should go for as much critical chance and critical damage as possible. Make critical chance your priority for the items you pick from blacksmith or when you engrave it. The amount of critical chance on your gear should always match 70%. Then you will always be able to get to 100% critical chance at full health with the help of your abilities and mastery points. The other engraving slots should be filled with 100% critical damage or 50% critical damage wherever possible. Then you will see we have one slot left on the head, we have one slot left on the belt, and we have one slot left on the boots. The other two slots on the torso are already used by our weapon damage, making heavy weapons the only weapons which do not overlap with critical damage or critical chance on the head and on the boots. You can now decide if you want to make a glass build. In that case, simply add more of your primary damage, in this case warrior damage or elemental damage engravings on the empty slots. Or you choose to use some defensive engravings, and there are three types of defensive engravings you can use in your build. The first one is resistances. Whenever you want to use resistances and you reach 100% for that resistance type, it will make you 100% completely immune against that damage types. So resistances are the strongest types of defensive perks you can use. But they will also require the most engraving slots. When you use melee resistance, you have 3 engraving slots for melee resistance and an additional all resistance slot if you want to use that on your torso as well. Then you have up to 4 engraving slots. Range resistance and elemental resistance also will cover up 2 to 3 engraving slots plus the additional all resistance slot on the torso. So when you want to use resistances, you are likely going to drop some critical damage somewhere in your build. However, you can reduce your damage to 50% if you use the 2 half damage engravings on the head and on the belt. Together with the masteries, you can make that to 100% half damage. It will not make you completely immune, but it will greatly reduce the damage you take. However, a third option that only uses one engraving is when you use the Become Isu Enhance legendary engraving on your headgear. That will trigger automatically when you get hit. You will still take damage, but you will not be able to die for the next 20 seconds. So it is relatively safe, but also a bit risky because it has 2 minutes cooldown, and during that period you can still be killed. Of course, there are some ways to reduce that cooldown time, but we will not go deeper into that in this tutorial. And finally, after equipping all our pieces, we not only have 140,000 warrior damage, but thanks to the Bighorn Bow we also have 140,000 hunter damage. But there are also some hidden treasures in the abilities. When we check out the abilities, we have some abilities that give you free damage. The most important ones are Shadow Assassin, because that one gives you 50% additional critical damage and also 40% assassin damage. So even if you don't want to use the assassin playstyle at all, it really doesn't matter in which tree it is placed, you will simply get another 50% critical damage even for your warrior or hunter attacks. So simply go for it no matter what. Then of course we have Weapons Master with the 10% additional crit chance and 40% warrior damage. We also have Gear Master for the armor and Archery Master for the headshot damage and hunter damage. Then you should also go for the free elemental damage. When you unlock Fire Mastery you get 40% additional fire damage, and when you unlock Poison Mastery you get 25% additional poison damage. And that's not everything, you also have to go for your Masteries. Of course, everybody knows that you have to get 5% crit chance and 10% crit chance at full health here in the Masteries, but the next best thing you have to go for is your weapon damage, not critical damage. First go for weapon damage. So in this build go for the 30% damage with heavy blades to increase your damage the most, and only then after you did that go for critical damage at full health, then critical damage, warrior damage and all the other stuff. And what is most important here about the masteries, do not spend all 20 points here before you move on to the next mastery. Instead, spread your points across all the listed masteries before you try to max them out. Because the last 10 points give you much less bonus than the first 10 points of every mastery. So I think that's it. If you want to have more advanced builds with more fancy stuff, of course you have to check out the build videos on the channel. But this will also be a very good heavy blade build and you should maybe check it out as well. Please don't forget to subscribe, leave me a like and see you next time.